people who don't understand Bitcoin see 100K as sort of a natural top. The way I'm sure they saw 1,000K as a natural top or 10,000K. You're never priced out of Bitcoin. It's always incredibly cheap. I think 100K is the last major beast. I don't think people will look at 1 million the way we're looking at 100K. By then, it'll be much more solidified in mainstream consciousness, in society, as a pillar, as a safe haven. It has to happen at 1 million. I think exchanges start pricing things at sats because it's 1 sat per penny at that point. If you're using Bitcoin as your unit of account, you're going to outperform everyone. It's like a superpower. I wish retail got more involved and could partake because I think it's the people's money. I want to separate money from state. The more people that are involved in that, the better chance we have.
Do you think we have the chance to really completely separate out the fiat system and be on a Bitcoin-only standard?
I think it's inevitable. Self-custody is a paradigm shift for humanity to be able to protect and carry your wealth and transport it. There's only the 3 things in the world that are scarce: Bitcoin, time, and family.
Hi, Cedric. How are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
Yeah, everything's great. It's an exciting morning. I guess just topically, it's December 5th, 12:47 p.m. my time, and Bitcoin broke 100K last night. So it was a little hard to go to sleep last night, and I kind of got up a little earlier than usual this morning. So yeah, it's exciting.
Oh yeah, on your side, it broke it in the evening. For me, it was like 3 a.m, so I slept over it.
Right. No, yeah, we were going to sleep as it was happening. Maybe it was around like 9 or 10 at night, maybe 11 when it really was cranking up to, I think it touched 104 in US dollars. Yeah, so that was kind of fun. Things have tapered off a little bit this morning, which is kind of understandable. But it's kind of fun to be an open field past the 100K psychological barrier, which is kind of just, nominal and just arbitrary, in just fiat terms. But I think it is a huge sort of psychological barrier for most people, or especially, US dollar minded unit of account people. It's a really big, I think, moment.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, even outside of the US and outside of people that use the US dollar, look at the US dollar price and not the euro price. I remember when back in the day I made in German videos on Bitcoin on TikTok in 2020, like a long day ago. People were upset if I showed the euro price. Because you should measure Bitcoin in the US dollar price, apparently. I mean, it makes sense because it's the godfather, the mother of all fiat currencies, and that's the end goal where we want to be, and that's kind of the scoreboard of how bad the fiat system is doing, and we really want to get to the US dollar because that's the grand daddy that we really want to get over with.
Yeah, for sure, and it seems like that's also big topic of conversation now with Powell talking about Bitcoin not being a competitor to the US dollar. Jerome Powell, Fed chairman, but more of a competitor to gold. And I think he's, right on one front and wrong on the other. But, I think gold is next, and that's a 9x from here. So for a lot of people, they look at sort of the gold market cap as maybe the next stop. But yeah, it's kind of dynamic. It's interesting, fun. Even if I think something I've thought about, even if you've expected this and, kind of ran the numbers and kind of knew this would happen one day, it's still, I think, very exciting, and it's still interesting to go through and fun time to be alive.
What is the importance for you about that milestone? We know from the earliest the videos where someone and actually the same guy made it with 100,000 also, where he recorded with $100 the first videos, and there are people of like $1 or like $1,000. What is the importance now of that $100,000? Because Bitcoin is quite the same if it's at like 95 or like 120 or something like that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think that, it really illuminates price versus value. For someone who thinks that Bitcoin has infinite value, that each Bitcoin is going to be worth, everything divided by 21 million, this is sort of expected, and it's not a big deal. It's just another number. But for a lot of people, it kind of makes you realize that we're early in the cycle or in Bitcoin's trajectory, because a lot of people who don't understand Bitcoin see 100K as sort of a natural top, the way I'm sure they saw 1,000K as a natural top or 10,000K. So a lot of people over the holidays were expressing surprise and shock and awe over, Bitcoin's move to 95, 96, 98K. They didn't understand Bitcoin, but they also felt like it's over. They missed it again. 100K is the top. It's end game. It's final. It's now worth 100K. It makes you. It features that they're focused on unit price bias. So they're not thinking about the total market cap of Bitcoin, the total addressable market of Bitcoin, what Bitcoin's going after, why it's valuable, why it comes here. They're just saying, all I know is the last time you told me about this thing, it was 15,000 or 30,000 or 55,000. Wow, it's worth a lot more. This is a natural top. This is 100K. This is a round number. And for Bitcoin, it's just another one in front of more zeros. And we expect the next one in front of more zeros one day, and then more zeros after that. But for just, I don't know, it's just that big round number. And they're like, I guess we're done. We're done here. You were early. I'm late. It's over. And it makes, you have to be really, or I strived to be really humble in those moments. And I didn't just scream, well, it's going to, you're going to say the same exact thing at 10 million, a million, and then 10 million and 100 million. Because I tried saying that 1,000, or really more like 5,000 and 10,000 and 20,000. But here we are again. And so it's that big round number. And this cycle is very different. Retail's not as interested. I think they are getting, you're never priced out of Bitcoin. It's always incredibly cheap. It's always the cheapest thing on earth. But in terms of unit price biased, a lot of people are like, I'll never get a whole Bitcoin. They're not trading with their future self. They're trading with you. So there's disappointment for them in this moment. There's dismay. There's anger. There's resentment. There's a lot to unpack there when they're kind of, into friends and family commenting on price and things like that. But yeah, I think 100K is sort of the last major beast. I don't think people will look at 1 million the way we're looking at 100K though. I don't think that like there'll be as big a moment from 990,000 to 1.1 million, or when we cross 1 million in terms of, it'll be just as exciting, but I think by then it'll be much more solidified in sort of mainstream consciousness in society as a pillar, as a safe haven, as a trusted institution, not an institution in the sense that it's run by men and women, or it has rulers and not, it's still going to be rules without rulers. But I don't think it's going to be a momentous moment. Maybe I'm naive, but I think this is the last one that's celebrated in that manner.
For me, it's really interesting. When do you think we switch kind of to a smaller unit when we look at the price at Satoshis, or maybe even something else? Because the unit bias is something really interesting, but at some point it probably doesn't make sense for us to track the one Bitcoin number, because it's just like such a big number, and it makes sense maybe to track a Satoshi number, or maybe something in between. I don't know what will happen.
Yeah, I think it has to happen at 1 million. I think exchanges start pricing things at sats because it's 1 sat per penny at that point. It's a unit price bias, and the Satoshi thing has been very frustrating because you lose a lot of people when you start saying, like, you could buy fractions of a Bitcoin. There's 100 million of them per Bitcoin. They're like, whoa, this thing is weird. It's funky. And it's really hard for them to make the parallel between Bitcoin and sats and dollars and cents. It's for some reason, it's very hard, like, to say to someone like, well, just because you're not going to get paid $100,000 this weekend doesn't mean that you wouldn't go to work for $100 a day or $200 a day or $300 a day. Like, you don't start at that $1 million note unit. But in Bitcoin, for some reason, people have a hard time breaking it down. But I've said this before on my own show, but at 1 million per Bitcoin, it's 1 sat per penny. And at that point, I think people who are used to thinking in terms of reallocation, not just allocating new money to Bitcoin, because I think that's with retail most of how they think about, you want me to buy this Bitcoin thing, like I'd have to have X amount of dollars lying around to buy it that are not being used for anything else. Versus, I already have X amount of dollars in gold. Let me just take half my gold, call my broker at Fidelity and say, I want half my gold position now allocated to Bitcoin. They don't care what the price is at that point. They just want to move from one thing to the other. But at 1 cent per sat, these kinds of people making this move don't care about paying 2 cents per sat. I mean, it could literally double on the overnight. Wait a minute. Oh, it's 1 cent per sat, and I need this thing. I'll pay 1.2 per sat. I'll pay 1.5 cents per sat. Like, it just whatever my allocation is, I would pay that unit incremental increase because it sounds so cheap. And I think that would be a big mindset or mind shift for a lot of people when you start talking in Satoshis. I mean, I wish in a way, and I think Satoshi might have wanted this. And I don't advocate for any real change now. But if you do like the modeling in your head, it would be, I think, so much better if there were just Bitcoins, and then for 100 million Bitcoins, you had, like, say, a Satoshi. And you just said, oh, like, you just bought 1,000 Bitcoins or 1 million Bitcoins or 10 million Bitcoins. And I think at this point, I understand that in the beginning that didn't make sense because no one wanted to buy 400 million Bitcoins for 18 cents. It didn't make sense, but now it does. And so I'm not advocating for real change. I'm not saying the community or people should get together and have a campaign, but it would make things much more explainable to, what we would call retailer normies.
Yeah, and I think that change will naturally occur. I mean, for example, my exchange that I use in Austria already shows by default your how many Bitcoins you have in Satoshis, actually.
That's awesome.
And it feels really good, to be honest. If I stack Satoshis and it's like shows like 3.5 million Satoshis, and I'm like, wow. Compared when you see the Bitcoin number to it, it's like, that's not too much. And even though it's just a unit thing, but people really think in units. Like, they think in 1 day or 1 week, or they think in like, I want to have one class of that. Or I also, with like Bitcoin, it's like, I want to have 1 Bitcoin. Want to be a whole coiner, or I want to have 10 Bitcoin. Those things actually matter to our human psychology, but actually it doesn't matter. What will you do? Like, the 21 million limit could also be 42 million. Maybe he chose that number, or it could be 10 million. We don't like, that's just an arbitrary number, and then it would all be different. So, but yeah, I get why a unit is really important for human beings. Even for me, I see it myself. If I see the same amount of Bitcoin, even like half the amount of Bitcoin in Satoshis versus the double the amount in Bitcoin, I'm thinking like, oh wow, like I'm way richer with the Satoshis than I feel with my Bitcoin. That's a real thing that I've discovered even on my own, even 4 years into Bitcoin. And I think especially with beginners, it's way more the case. I guess so.
Yeah, for sure. I think unit of account is the superpower of Bitcoin. Even if you don't have a lot of Bitcoin, you have just a few sats or whatever you might have. Thinking in Bitcoin is using Bitcoin as your unit of account, and what that will enable you to do is just beat everyone you ever face on Earth in calculations. Maybe not dramatically at each trade, but over time you're going to make better trades against others, for yourself, for your family. You're going to just make better economic calculations. And what using economics is, and you get this from Seyfried's book, Principle of Economics, is all about just making better life decisions to maximize your leisure, right? How do you get the most out of your ability to work and perform and produce so that you can consume and rest and relax when you choose to or want to or have more of that? So how do you make all these calculations? And if you're using Bitcoin as your unit of account, you're going to outperform everyone. It's like a superpower, not just if you're running a business, but if you're just buying groceries or whatever it is. But to your point, it's, using Bitcoin as your unit account is difficult if you don't think in Bitcoin a lot. And, the denominator is not always easy to work with because it's large. And that's why a lot of people are frustrated by the unit bias, even if they're just looking to make their first purchase. I know for myself, when I went to make my first purchase, buy my first sats, Bitcoin, I was using the legacy system to move my money. and I was making an ACH from my bank to the exchange, and it took so many business days that the price of Bitcoin went up 50%. And by the time my money landed, so I wasn't going to be able to buy a whole Bitcoin. And that was an incredibly frustrating moment. It was illuminating in a lot of ways because at the time I wasn't thinking about payment rails, right? Like Bitcoin is faster payment rails. I hadn't bought Bitcoin yet. I hadn't moved it off an exchange yet, or maybe I'd heard that, but like I wasn't. But I was frustrated by the banking system, which helped me a bit with Bitcoin later on. And that was a really clear cut case of it. But now I'm on the exchange and I'm not, I fucking hate Coinbase for this, but they had Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin. And I'm thinking that for some reason, these three things belong in the same bucket or the same asset class somehow, some way. The only way I could figure it out is by maybe blockchain ties them together. But because I couldn't buy one whole Bitcoin, I was now more motivated or inspired or incentivized to kind of maybe buy some of these shit coins because I could buy whole of them. And I was still not going to get a whole Bitcoin. So why not buy half a Bitcoin instead of 2/3 of a Bitcoin or whatever it was at the time? Why not buy a quarter of a Bitcoin and buy 5 or 10 of these and 3 and 5 of those? And those things actually ran more in the next 6 weeks than Bitcoin did towards the end of 2017. So I was all confused now. These things were outperforming Bitcoin. Maybe I was earlier to these things and they're similar. Maybe they're all the same, they're similar horses in the same race. So yeah, unit bias is really tough for people and confusing, and but it's part about learning about money and market cap and markets and trading and store value and having a reserve asset and what you're taking profits in.
Absolutely. And I want to get to Altcoins a little later because it's interesting how this cycle, they kind of a non-topic. But before I want to get into 100K being a trigger for maybe retail to wake up a little bit. You said it before, retail is not really a part of that Bitcoin cycle till now. It seems like only institutions, Michael Saylor and maybe America soon is buying Bitcoin, which is for me a sad story. Like I want America to sell their Bitcoin and the plebs buying Bitcoin. Will that 100K now coming into the mainstream cycle, now coming into other news cycle, is that maybe a trigger for the retail folks to finally wake up? Or as you said before, it's like it's over now. And now I don't even look at Bitcoin because now it's only going down from here.
Well, I think they're going to be triggers. I think maybe more at like 110K when we really break through Bitcoin and more open field. I think it'll start to be on CNBC more and all those sort of business channels. It's going to be in people's faces. And I think for people that, still want to convert their assets or get exposure to this, they're still early. And so some people are going to get it. It's not that retail is priced out. No one's ever priced out. But I think the majority of the money coming to the table aren't going to be retail going forward even. But they'll have the opportunity. I think they'll get the triggers, the signals. They'll see the movement. It's up to them, though, to find out or learn if they think that this thing could go to, like, say, 1 million or more, or be what the Bitcoiners think it is, and do their own work and do their own research. The opportunity will be there, and they're not priced out. But they are, in the sense, though, in terms of if retail wanted to go in and go all in, I don't, it's not the same amount of capital that institutions are going to bring to the table. And Bitcoin is for enemies. I'm not rooting for retail to be, less of a driver of Bitcoin's price going forward. I wish retail got more involved and could partake, because I think it's the people's money. I don't think it's just a trade or a way to make money. And I think it's a way to defend yourself. And I want to separate money from state. And I think the more people that are involved in that, the better chance we have. And the sooner they get involved, the better chance we have. And you want to help your loved ones and your friends and family. And that's what I think of when we don't think of, I don't think of retail derisively. I mean, I think it's just, normal everyday people. And that's who we've all been advocating for. But we're watching Saylor speculative attack at the corporate level, and soon it's going to be the nation state level. And, they're going to drive the price, I think, a lot higher just with the amount of capital they bring to the table.
100%. do you think we have the chance to really completely separate out the fiat system and be on a Bitcoin only standard? It seems to be very controversial these days in Bitcoin.
I think it's inevitable. I don't think it's happening soon. And so I think it's like kind of, I think that's a really hard conversation to have for people who want to thread the needle more publicly, and they don't want to touch that third rail. So, but I mean, if you just do the math, I mean, if you say, okay, it's going to take 50 years, 100 years, maybe 140 years, I think it's inevitable that those things kind of wither and crumble, or are reborn in a way that we can't imagine right now. The way, Amazon attacked books first, and you thought they were going for physical book retailers, and they were really going for every single retail vertical on earth. But even Jeff didn't know about, AWS and cloud computing. So there'll be, uses for Bitcoin and different layers that we can't fathom now. So, money and fiat and private money might last for a long time, but I think it's inevitable that the money gets separated from state.
I definitely hope so, and that's the whole purpose. I feel like from Bitcoin. But now quickly to the altcoin topic. I just don't see them that much in this cycle. Like I remember in the 2017 cycle, 2020 cycle, 2021 especially also, altcoins were extremely present, even in my Twitter feed, in the comments. And now I get those spam comments of like complete scams, like there's like weird tokens that you just try to pump with bots. But that whole altcoin cycle seems to like slow down a little bit. Maybe I'm just too deep in the Bitcoin only bubble
I think that's part
this
of
time.
it.
But do you also have the same experience?
I feel the way you do, but I think that's because we're really deep in the Bitcoin ecosystem and sort of that bubble. I do when I ran into a lot of people from my high school reunion recently, and they're all into altcoins. I use that pejoratively. They're not all into altcoins, but some of the ones I talked to were very much like, what do you think about crypto and what about this coin and that coin? And I'm seeing that percolate more. I think Ripple just maybe, I don't follow this, but maybe they just won a case against the SEC or something, and there's been a big pump. And I do feel like, but I also think that, so there's, I think, three things. I think it's still there. We see it less, but I also think MicroStrategy has kind of destroyed altcoins from any rational perspective. So I'm not calling MicroStrategy a shitcoin. I mean, you can call everything a shitcoin, then it's not Bitcoin then. But I think it's the world's greatest security ever created on public markets, like in the history of mankind. But again, that's not a reason to sell your Bitcoin, or it's not Bitcoin. It's something very different. Maybe it's great if you have money trapped in this retirement system or the system. And I think it's really great for people that are institutions that can only buy bonds, and institutions that can only buy stocks and not ETFs and things like that. So I think he's refining Bitcoin for certain markets. But I think that sort of destroyed altcoins in a lot of ways. Because it's just, if you really want to like maybe juice your returns, gamble, whatever it is that, or leverage that you would get out of shitcoining, you could kind of get it now with MicroStrategy and have it be tied to Bitcoin. Tied maybe not in a direct way. You don't get Bitcoin when you exit or anything like that, but it's, related more so than those other things. And I think the narratives on those other things are getting weaker. But I don't think they're, I think, we'll see at some point, like there's a lot of optimism right now. I think you'll see, again, a big pushback towards like the WEF and these sort of organizations looking to blockchain and AI and put information on AI and put decisions on AI. And people are going to be like, what chain's going to be involved in AI and all that bullshit. I don't even know how to like give the spiel anymore for their side. But I think you'll see some of that. And so I don't think it's over. But I do feel as Bitcoiners, we feel it less.
It's super interesting. I smiled when you said MicroStrategy because I've said that since a few episodes now that I feel like the new distraction from Bitcoin self custody are now no longer altcoins but MicroStrategy, and I have deep respect for what Michael Saylor is doing, and I think MicroStrategy is doing a great job in evangelizing for Bitcoin and also driving the price up just by like buying a lot, but. I personally just wouldn't buy the stocks. Like I like Bitcoin self custody, and now you kind of see the crowd that is really here for freedom and for the freedom go up technology, and the other crowd in Bitcoin that just wants to the highest number go up technology, and they are kind of switching or have a MicroStrategy play. I mean, there are some people that just want to support MicroStrategy as a company, and it's like, yeah, let's put 1% of my portfolio in MicroStrategy just that I be part of that story. But most of them that are in MicroStrategy want that leverage of Bitcoin. And I always said it's the same distraction from Bitcoin self-custody as previous altcoins. But it's interesting how you framed it as like a MicroStrategy pulls away from the altcoin season. It's an interesting perspective on that.
Yeah, it's also going to hoover up the bond market. I mean, he's offering bond buyers like pensions, they can't buy Bitcoin. They can't buy the ETF. So they want exposure, and they can loan him money at 0% because they know it's backed by Bitcoin, and or at 75 basis points. And they can't, that's their way to get Bitcoin. And there's trillions in that can't buy spot Bitcoin because of the rules and the FASB and accounting regulations around carrying it on their balance sheet. So he's refining Bitcoin for them, and that's not us, maybe. And it gives them none of the benefits of what you mentioned, self-custody. I mean, self-custody is a paradigm shift for humanity to be able to protect and carry your wealth and transport it and all these things. And I don't even think that those qualities of Bitcoin, I think, which probably helped it in the beginning a lot more than it helps it right now. I think those qualities will come back as nations, states, and corporations start to stack Bitcoin and really start to then, because you can't even, fathom certain ways of thinking or perspectives about holding Bitcoin until you do. And even when you hold maybe like, let's say you start with $100 in self-custody, you're going to think about that self-custody when it grows either naturally through purchase price appreciation against the dollar, or you add to it, right? So now if it's worth 100 grand, you're going to think about it differently. You might have a different setup for protecting it. You might involve other people in a legacy plan or inheritance plan. And all of that keeps changing as it grows in value. And there's an evolution for corporations and nation states that they haven't even gone on that journey yet. How they think about, their exposure to this asset and what value it brings to them. So, Michael Saylor first, looked at it as like, I have a $500 million melting ice cube. So here's a brilliant engineer, entrepreneur, CEO. He's looking at his melting ice cube and he starts doing the A/B test. Like, what should treasuries are not working. They've gone from a plus to a minus. And he makes the calculation that he can't give it all back to shareholders through dividends, buybacks, etc., because he has to keep the lights on. He has to promise shareholders that they're going to be running in 20 years. All stakeholders have to be guaranteed service in perpetuity. So you have to have reserves. You can't give that back. So you have to protect it. You should grow it. You should manage it. So he's like, okay, I'm going to look at all 6 or 7 asset classes, real estate, fine art, stocks, bonds, treasuries, gold, Bitcoin, and I'm going to pick the winner, right? Because again, back to diversification, like I have 10 kids and I'm on the Titanic and sinking, and there's 10 lifeboats and 9 lifeboats have holes in them. Am I going to put my, each kid in a boat and diversify their odds of making it, or are we all going in the boat that has no holes? So now he's like, okay, I'm in the boat with the holes. I start buying this thing. And now what else can I do with it? Oh, wow, I could become a Bitcoin refinery. I didn't see that 3 years ago when I started stacking, right? I just saw share price appreciation. I didn't think about Bitcoin yield per share when I started this. But now now that I'm in this seat and I'm this brilliant engineer, maybe the best architect, engineer on earth, and I'm going to engineer, and financialize this security. And he's going to play. It's like watching Babe Ruth in the stock market, speculative attack the whole market. And why wouldn't you root him on? It doesn't mean that you have to give him your money and that you have to give up all the attributes of Bitcoin. It doesn't have to be for you, but you don't have to root against him either. I think it's wild.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece, and make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also, he's a smart cookie. That's
he's
for
doing
sure.
smart things. I mean, the biggest concern you'd have to have is around custody. Anybody. So again, if you're doing anything that's close to MicroStrategy, from Mara to Microsoft to Dell, I mean, you're in this, you have to worry about how they manage their assets, right? But any of these sort of public companies that are buying Bitcoin, you have to manage, or the ETFs, how are they managing the asset, the Bitcoin? That'd be your main concern. I do think that they should move to sort of a proof of reserves at some point. MicroStrategy, they should figure that out with their custodians or something. Be more transparent on that. That would be nice to see. I'm a don't trust, verify kind of person. So again, like, these are reasons that you buy Bitcoin in self custody. You're not gaining this with MicroStrategy. It might be a great way to get grandma exposure to Bitcoin price appreciation. It might be a great way to get exposure to price appreciation of Bitcoin in your 401k or your Roth or whatever you feel your money's trapped in. But it's not Bitcoin. But it's fascinating to see what he can do. Because I mean, to think that we'd never see the financialization of Bitcoin and Bitcoin-like products, I think would be naive. I mean, I come from a finance and accounting background. I don't think banking is wrong. I don't think credit is wrong. Maybe the system is fucked up. Maybe all the rules are wrong in terms of fractional reserve banking. Maybe it should be 100% backed. But people are always going to, there's always going to be situations going forward where people have capital and don't know how to, they want to deploy it and allocate it, but they don't necessarily want to be owner operators, right? And they're going to be people that don't have capital and have ideas and want to build things and want to be owner operators. And so I think there's always going to be an opportunity for lending and credit and securities and bonds and all these things. And maybe they're all backed with Bitcoin one day, and maybe and maybe it's a fair and just system, and we're not pitted against each other with these tools, and we're not dealing with the bank, with the state fucking with and debasing our money. but it doesn't mean all those things go away. And so there's going to be a bridge on the way to there, and doesn't even mean what Michael Saylor is doing right now is an end game. He's trying different things. Maybe it all blows up in his face. Maybe he tries something and something goes wrong, like he's Enron or something. I don't think that's where it's going. But again, all these risks are included. And it's one of the reasons I think that's so great about Bitcoin is you eliminate that. You eliminate business risk. It's like with real estate, you have location risk, you have repairs and maintenance, you have all these sort of different risk factors, right? You're going to get a tenant. You run a business. Are you going to get, you want to open up a bar? Can you get a license from the mayor? Will your competitor get a better license from the mayor or deny you a license so that they can have a better business, right? There's political risk, there's business risk, so Bitcoin eliminates all that. I think of it as sort of the risk-free asset. You're not, you have your share of the network and nobody can debase that, come between it. You just have to learn how to store and manage it properly. And from your first amount of sats, you're going to one day be wealthy. This thing's going to increase in value infinitely forever. So even if you have a small amount, if you can hold on and manage that for a while and just do your life in the meantime, you're going to be wealthy one day. And I think that is powerful. That changes how you go about everything in your life. You become more low time preference, and you make, again, even just better decisions. Maybe not better calculations, but maybe emotionally you're in a better place to make decisions. You're more stabilized. Maybe your health is good. I mean, Dr. Jeff Ross talks about Bitcoin is essentially healthcare. You're going to be healthier just by being on a Bitcoin standard. It's going to change how you look at food. It's going to change how you look at, maybe exercise, or change how you look at your relationships. And stress is a killer. If you're waking up every day trying to figure out how to make money, Michael Dunworth talks about Bitcoin should be it's like a fruit tree. So, you plant your fruit tree, and even if you don't consume all the fruit and manage to save a few seeds, and you just get more fruit trees, and eventually you're going to have more fruit than you can, eat. And you'll be able to share instead of take, So I think just being in your mind on a Bitcoin standard can change your life.
How has Bitcoin impacted your life so far?
In all those ways, I think the one way that's inverse for Bitcoiners is you think Bitcoin's going to give you your time back, and then Bitcoin takes all your time. So, I started a podcast and I go to conferences now, and so it's this day, and I'm giving my time to Bitcoin, but it consumes you. And maybe more of that time should be with my friends and family, as I had promised myself. And so, but yeah, it's changed me dramatically. And, I don't think it's changed me at my core, right? I don't think it's changed me. I'm not a different person, but it's enabled me, I think, to be a better version of myself and to focus on the things that I had kind of pushed aside, the parts of me that I kind of pushed aside, like that you could sum it up maybe like in conspiracy theories and questioning thing. I had pushed a lot of that aside. I just started to, I'd be like, I don't think I agree with that, but everyone is saying that's, I'm not, don't think like that or whatever. And Bitcoin was the first thing where you could be like, I can disagree with you, but it's mathematically proven here. You can't prove me wrong. So it was very empowering in that way. And I think it helps you find, for me, like-minded people, other truth seekers. I think that's the one thing we have in common. I don't think Bitcoiners have as much in common as we might think, aside from maybe being truth seekers. Especially as more and more people use Bitcoin, it's kind of like, with the dollar, you wouldn't walk around now with a dollar symbol on your necklace and think you're cool. You would just be showing off some form of weird wealth, right? It would be unnecessary, and you wouldn't have to support it in that way. It would just be ubiquitous, and everyone uses it. But I think we're going through that period where Bitcoin is sort of like hip hop, and it's like culture, and it's like a movement. And so people do want to wear it on their clothing and do want to kind of talk about it and have Bitcoin themed music, because I think it's where the most important ideas are taking place. Even if all the ideas aren't, that's why I do the show. It's it's not that every idea is rooted in Bitcoin, but seems like Bitcoiners are being grabbed by the most interesting ideas in the world.
That's super interesting. Yeah. And yeah, it definitely consumes like Bitcoin definitely consumes you, because I the more and more I come into Bitcoin, the more and more time I spend in Bitcoin and doing Bitcoin, even though I have now more freedom financially and otherwise, where I could spend more time with friends, and probably I should spend more time with friends and other things, but I'm just like obsessed with Bitcoin, because it's just like such a unique 5 to 10 years window right now, where we can see that suddenly phase all of the sudden actually occurring. I'm also not a big believer in diminishing returns. I think that's
I think
BS,
it's
but
increasing returns from here.
yeah, absolutely. Especially when you see like we had like that gradually phase now, and we are only such a small amount, and we will get here at some point. At some point, we have to make that huge jump. It's just like like the timing is impossible to time, of course.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Really interesting. This year has been also very different from other, like I've been in Bitcoin since around 4 or 5 years now. And this year felt quite different because it has been so politicized. Yeah, Trump used it and everything like that. We have the Bitcoin ETF. It has been institutionalized as never before. The traditional financial space really comes in. It's also interesting to see all the CNBCs and the normal channels actually talking positive about Bitcoin, and the finance channels, except in Austria, but in America it definitely changed. How has been the year for you? What stood out to you for you?
I think definitely sort of the political rhetoric, or, sort of maybe Trump's speech in Nashville, RFK Jr.'s speech in Nashville. A lot of, I didn't envision it being this big part of the political sphere this year. I think the ETF was a little bit more expected, just in terms, again, I'm not trying to root for ETFs or say ETFs are a better way to manage your Bitcoin or anything like that. You lose all the qualities of Bitcoin. But I think we were all waiting for Wall Street to financialize Bitcoin, and ETFs make a lot of sense. And, I think the growth was phenomenal. I was surprised by, again, just I think the biggest surprise for me, again, mentioning everything you did, I think all that was somewhat expected. I didn't, aside from the political sphere and how crazy that got, but like none of this seemed to move sort of outside the bubble yet. You still had sort of, different institutions coming, like the ETF players chose to come to the bubble, and then other ETF players chose not to, right? And stay outside. And who shared it with their customers was a choice. It just wasn't everywhere yet. And yet you have tremendous price appreciation. You have the ETFs, you have politicians talking about it to the extent they have. And yet I felt like the greater atmosphere wasn't moved at all. And I think that's very bullish. It shows how early we are. But I think that was the biggest surprise for me. I even said that back at the Canadian Bitcoin conference, I think in like April. I mean, even then, Bitcoin was up like 40 or 50% for the year. And it's on every ticker on CNBC, and yet still Wall Street was still kind of quiet outside the ETF bubble even. I'm most surprised by how people aren't, like the faces didn't melt this year.
Yeah, I'm surprised actually. Like that's also a good point. Uh, how few messages Bitcoiners are getting, how few interest of retail is actually there, even though it's so big. It's also interesting. I just saw today the news and was curious of how the Austrian mainstream media is covering the 100K. So I was going on there and seeing how they reported, and two takeaways I got is like the one, Trump alone push Bitcoin to 100K,
Right.
and because of Trump now Bitcoin is there. And the second thing is like consumer production and other institutions say Bitcoin is too volatile, it's speculative, it's risky, and all the things. But that we hear since the beginning, it kind of gets boring. But yeah, the Trump was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't like how much. I wish it was a little bit more of Trump coming to us than I felt that than it was Bitcoiners trying to put on a Trump thing. I think everyone should bend the knee to Bitcoin, both parties, all politicians. And it's been politicized in a weird way. Like my mother, lifelong New York City public school teacher, very liberal Democrat. And her friends were like, and she's a Bitcoiner, and her friends are like, are you, a Republican now, and it's interesting, like how, like, but I think it's just a sad state of where our society is at. People with the political parties and the food fighting, and I think it's all kayfabe and it's fake, and I think both parties are ruled by the same people, and then they're using that to pit us against each other, and it's sad the way everyone's taking the bait. And for me, I think the best thing about Bitcoin maybe this year was being able to remove myself from all that, to sort of depoliticize myself. I don't root for party. If I'm going to get involved politically, I want it to be very local. Try to look at every issue on its own. I try not to get caught up in sort of the class warfare. And but it's really sad to see how for non-Bitcoiners that they're getting caught up in all this and pitted, and Bitcoin. It's a shame for them. I hate to see Bitcoin involved in that. And not that Bitcoin cares. Bitcoin's math. But it's just like, it sucks. I just wish that they saw both parties or people in that food fight. I just wish they would see Bitcoin in a universal way. And one day they will, I think. But right now they're using it against each other in their food fights, and that kind of annoying, especially at Thanksgiving, or things like that.
Do you think the Bitcoiners or Bitcoin is too much into politics, especially this year?
Well, Bitcoin's not anything. I just think that it's in that conversation a lot, and the people that are political minded like to find, like, well, you must think this because you believe in that, and it's a shame Bitcoin's in that, on either side. And I don't care. I'm not going to get involved in their arguments. It's like, don't argue with a fool, because from far away, no one can tell who's who. So I'm not going to act a fool with them, but and argue over these things that shouldn't be national issues even, or looked at that way. If we want to separate money from state, it's not a political thing from a party perspective. It's the Orange Party, So, but yeah, it's interesting. Like, my mom likes Bitcoin, and to see her friends attack her for it, or that's what I don't like. I don't care which way it's coming from. It's just, that sucks. And so it did get into that conversation, and it's a shame people, because the political sphere is so, what is it, like, everything is like a quip, right? So, or a headline. And so no one really goes and reads the article or reads an article critically. So people get opinions very quickly and, sort of, wield these things at each other. So from that perspective, I wish that it was less politicized this year. Especially I felt like at the Bitcoin conference, it was a little too much like a Trump rally instead of a Bitcoin rally that Trump had to speak at.
That's a good point.
And so I felt like that was a little out of bounds. But I'm not sure of how Bitcoin Magazine and David Bailey, they still pulled off a tremendous feat there. I think moving the conversation as far as they did. And you're going to break some eggs probably along the way. So who am I to criticize? But as someone who was like, oh wow, this feels more like a Trump rally instead of Trump speaking at a Bitcoin rally. Right? Like, to me, he should have felt like he needs us, not so much like we need him. And he's still, like, even his tweet today, or I think it was on Social Truth or whatever, True Social, was very much like, oh wow, Bitcoin reached 100K, you're welcome, or something like that. Very like taking credit for it. And even then, I think he took a lot of credit for like how well Bitcoin did during his administration, even though his administration was very anti-Bitcoin last time.
Yeah, it's super interesting.
So it's gonna be. I mean, he's got to release Ross on day one, or they really should be held to pay.
It's what did he hear? This congratulations. Wait, I can quickly put it up for those people that maybe not have seen it on the screen. Let me share that. Might be interesting. He's like, congratulations, Bitcoin has 100,000. You are welcome. Together we'll make America great again. Yeah, he's definitely taking credit for that. And the mainstream media
is very Trump, though. So I mean, it's in the book. He's by the book, and it does show that he's thinking about it, and maybe that he wants to help. I'm weary of sort of that. Maybe the things we're not expecting, like, or I wonder how much this administration is going to roll out like a CBDC or something to that effect, and or like digital surveillance and digital ID and national ID and a lot of these things. So that still remains to be seen. But I'd like to see him take some positive steps. It's good to see he wants to pump the price, but I'd really like to see him free Ross. I think that would be great. And I'd like to see him eliminate capital gains tax and make Bitcoin legal tender. Those would be real
that would be
tangible
great.
steps. You know?
Absolutely, yeah. That's super interesting, and it kind of taps into maybe even like your podcast name. It's the Matrix podcast, and I always argue a little bit like as you said before, like both sides kind of want the same thing. They both will spend money. They both will, like, of course there will be changes. Like if only Republicans on the power, only Democrats, there might be different changes that you actually experience. But like how big are they really? How big is your life changing from that? Is from there your name also originating from for your podcast?
Well, it kind of comes from the movie The Matrix, and sort of the idea of like entering or leaving the fiat matrix and living your life in the Bitcoin matrix or the Bitcoin overlay on a Bitcoin standard, and just looking at the world through a Bitcoin lens. And so I guess the word I used instead of lens there also is matrix. Like just you have like you're just looking at the world like it's a matrix, but it's a Bitcoin matrix now. And you're reading the world like that. It's basically like using Bitcoin as your unit of account in a way. You know, and I mean, yeah, I think that's your like silver bullet to get through the day, get through your day, and get through the world. You're going to value the things that are scarce, and there's only three things in the world that are scarce, in my opinion: Bitcoin, time, and family. You know, time is obviously scarce and limited. Bitcoin, I mean, I think we agree there, and then family. There's only so much family you could make, even if you were like a degenerate and whatever. I mean, you can't make that much family. So, it's precious, and it's how you value those things.
Yeah,
and I think,
absolutely.
and I think that brings up another conversation. I think that Bitcoiners are really debating right now, or trying to figure out, as there's one, I think Seb Bunny was talking about it, how like if you never intend to ever spend your Bitcoin, or i.e. trade it for things, like is that a fiat mindset? And you won't live forever, and you're not even guaranteed tomorrow. So, maybe it's okay to enjoy some of your Bitcoin today with your, yourself, your friends, and your loved ones, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just money. It's just a tool, there's the whole notion. It's like, don't buy, sell your chairs. If you want to buy a chair today, you could buy 10, tomorrow, but one day is tomorrow. Like at some point, like you're going to want a chair. And, like, do you want, do you need 11 of them? Do you need 114 of them? 1,087? Like when is enough chairs? In metaphoric purchase power terms, like to go get yourself a chair, or maybe even the best chair of your life. I don't know. Go get a nice chair.
Absolutely, and it kind of comes down to like there's the spectrum of like you're too high time preference where you just spend, and like whenever something comes in, like you just throw money at it. The other thing is like you kind of downgrade your life so much that the only thing that is good in your life is your Bitcoin balance sheet, and everything else is kind of like really shitty. You eat bad food, you do that, like, and that's like the two spectrums, and finding that healthy balance where you buy things, but things that bring value to your life, and not shit. I think that's the hard part of it, and
Right.
I hope that Bitcoin pushes us more to the healthy side, because I feel like we are now more at the consuming side. But maybe in the Bitcoin community, we maybe even like on the other side of the spectrum, because we have that Bitcoin and it just goes up that much, and we are in that unique window of time where you just like want to spend, like you and me, all the time in Bitcoin, making podcasts, making content, because you could miss out of something, and you also want to don't spend your Bitcoin, because if you spend it now, a week later it might be already gone at a whole different price level. So that's hard now now for Bitcoiners.
Yeah, I think it's like you don't want to confuse maybe like being frugal or with cheap. Cheap is like you never buy anything, and but frugal is more like you don't buy the $6 Starbucks so that when you do go to your favorite restaurant, you can afford to tip nicely. You're not cheap with the tip. You go to your favorite places and you treat people well, and you're generous there. But you avoid maybe things that you don't need or want, or just garbage, and sort of whatever consumption that's sort of fruitless or whatever. But it's not being cheap; it's frugal or whatever, affording, trying to figure out how to afford the things you want.
100%. I agree with that. One question that I always ask in the podcast, every guest, since I think like over 200 episodes now, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
Besides Bitcoin, wow. I don't know if I have anything to offer besides Bitcoin. I don't know. I think it's Bitcoin time and family. So I mean, really, think about your time, how you're spending it. Something I learned from, or not learned, I think that Safety expressed really well is like, it's like you're looking to meet the right person or something, like, the step before that is being the right person. Right. So, becoming the best person you could be, maybe not, sitting on your sats, waiting for them to be, some, innumerable value one day, but just continuing to create value in the world, save the overflow, and this Bitcoin will take care of that, but like continue to take care of yourself and be productive, add more value to the world than you take. Even Helen Keller, who's deaf, dumb, and blind, found a way to add more value to the world than she consumed. So anyone can kind of create in this world and work and whatever, produce value, and then take care of your family, build a family. So yeah, I think those are the things that I who am I to give anyone advice, especially maybe outside of Bitcoin. It's the one thing I speak publicly on, so I think the worst thing about advice is most people tell you what they would have done in your situation or in their own situation when they would have found themselves in that situation. And the advice is like nothing to do with you. And so maybe you can get something out of it or like apply something from it to your life, but like definitely take advice with that. Are they really trying to help you or just like express what they would have done in your shoes that would have been best for them? So I'm very hesitant to give people advice because I don't know what they need or are looking for, and I don't know what I'd offer. But yeah, I mean, value the things that your life are the most precious and scarce, and make the most of those.
Yeah, the advice is always with a grain of salt to take and see if it actually applies to your situation and be a critical thinker about something, because you can get from a great person a great advice that just doesn't apply to yourself.
Right.
That can be true, and I fell for that trap a lot of times where I listened to the right person at the right time, to the right advice, but it just was not right for me. So that definitely can happen. A lot of things I really like when I enter something new to see where where I want to go and what are those people doing, and maybe that's probably the best kind of advice. But it still has to apply to you. So there's always a grain of salt with that. But with that question, I really try to get into the Bitcoin podcast something outside of it, and sometimes it even comes in within the podcast where we talk about whole different things. We had whole episodes around parenting. We had whole episodes around other things, which is really cool, and also interesting to see that the Bitcoin community really likes that. Like they usually, if you think like you have a podcast with one topic and then you have one episode that falls out of that topic, that the average through duration, the click through rate, and all the metrics that you could look at will fall down. It didn't. Like it was average.
Probably
like it was good.
Because Bitcoiners are probably, they're looking for those, I think, those sort of diamonds in the rough, because like they're like, what more can I learn about Bitcoin? So it's awesome to hear these ideas that are kind of outside of Bitcoin, maybe through a Bitcoin lens. Maybe, around sort of, though, maybe related to Bitcoin, though. But I learned this from Trace Mayer, but, track your net worth in dollars, in gold, and in Bitcoin. It should be going up in all three, but I think you'll learn a lot there, and you'll be noticing that your Bitcoin net worth will trend towards the amount of sats you have, no matter how many sats you have over time, and that you'll kind of peak in Bitcoin terms at some point. And then, maybe to help you think in Bitcoin, maybe get something like a block clock, so that you can kind of think in sats per dollar or block height and other ways to kind of get Bitcoin into your mind. And think in Bitcoin, because thinking in Bitcoin is the real superpower.
That's where we want to be. Really cool. Thank you so much. We have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. The question for you is, do you think CBDCs will live with Bitcoin in combination, or is it either CBDC or Bitcoin?
Oh, they'll definitely be, I think, parallel. And I think CBDCs kind of already exist. You can maybe call Tether a CBDC or PayPal a CBDC. I think there'll be continued machinations of CBDCs, and I think that CBDCs and stable coins is what I think they'll really be. Will live a long time alongside Bitcoin until fiat dies.
Really cool. I hope that we come to that Bitcoin world as soon as possible. Maybe I see it in my lifetime. Let's see how fast we get there. Yeah, thank you so much, Cedric, for being on the show. Before I let you go, where can people find you, watch your show, and find out more about you?
Sure. You can find me at Ced Youngelman on Twitter or X. Also, you can find the show Bitcoin Matrix anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can find it on YouTube, and you could also find it on Twitter at _Bitcoin Matrix.
Really cool. Thank you so much for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.